If you are sick or have leprosy or some disease or have some discharge from any part of your body or you have mold in your house, does that mean you are no longer able to be in the presence of God? Does that mean that you've sinned? Does that mean you've lost God's favor? Has He abandoned you because of an illness or a sickness? Well, this is what the Israelites were dealing with in the book of Leviticus. Good morning, I'm Pastor Rini, Senior Pastor of Valley Christian Center. Welcome to 747 Morning Inspiration. And today we're in Leviticus 14 and 15. I'm going to talk about ritual purity. And ritual purity was a very important part of the book of Leviticus. Remember, Leviticus is all about trying to stay holy, to be in the presence of a holy God. So there was rituals of sacrifices that they had to do to stay holy. There were practices of the priests to stay holy. And there were practices of everyday life to keep themselves holy. Because if you had any kind of issues of any kind, and you had leprosy, or if there was even mold in your house, or if it was that time of the month for a woman, you were considered not pure, not whole, and not holy, and something had to be done to prepare you to be in the presence of a holy God. Now, when it comes to things like leprosy and sickness and mold and touching a dead body and things like this, all of those represent death, right? They represent sickness. And any kind of impurity of sickness or impurity of mold or fungus or actually impurity of touching a dead body or any kind of discharge from the body at all, these were considered part of death, not part of life. God represents life, holiness, wholeness, and purity. And so in Leviticus, you had to do special rituals to remove that impurity before you could be re-engaged in the presence of a holy God. And it's important to note that impurity is not immorality. Impurity is not a sin, but it does prevent the ability to be in the presence of a pure God. So impurities happen to people. Sickness happens to people. But you still cannot go into a sacred place, not because of an immoral act, but because of an impurity in your body. And so they had these, what was called ritual purity acts that you had to do to cleanse yourself so that there'd be no defilement in the worship area of the living God. If there was a moral impurity, that means you created an act that was like bloodshed or idolatry or sexual actions that were impure. That's a different kind of issue, and it has to be dealt with as a sin issue where impurity were just things that happened in everyday life that happened to people. So, for instance, if your house had mold, which we have it today in your house, they do the same thing we did today, except they considered that an impurity and it made you unclean. So they would scrub the walls down, they would try to replaster the house, and if the mold went away, they would do a quick little offering of some turtle doves or something to God, and then they'd let you go back into the house. But if the mold continued, even after scraping down the walls, even after replastering the house, they would literally tear down the house and drag it outside the city because that impurity made you unclean if you lived in that house. And so you had to get clean before you can go back and worship together with the Israelites in their tabernacle. So ritual impurity caused you to be unclean, and there was always a set of remedies that one must follow to become clean again. Leprosy is another one. Leprosy, there was a process of washing, a process of staying away from the people, a process of showing yourself to the priest when it began to go away. And then they would anoint you and wash you, and then they would slowly put you back into the public square where you could be in the presence of a holy God. So leprosy was not an immoral act. It was simply something that was a sickness, and it made you unholy and impure, and you had to get through a bunch of rituals to get holy again. Let me read this to you regarding leprosy. This is important because of how they treated it. It says this is verse 4. The priest shall command them to take for him who is to be cleansed 2 live clean birds, and cedar wood, and scarlet yarn, and hyssop. And the priest shall command them to kill one of the birds in the earthenware vessel over fresh water. He shall take the live bird with the cedar wood and the scarlet yarn and the hyssop, and dip them in the live bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over fresh water. So there was definitely some atonement that had to happen because of the impurity of leprosy. And he shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who is to be cleansed of the leprous disease. He shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird go into the open field. So you see, even in that little sacrifice, there is the picture, the symbolism of a crucified Christ that died and a resurrected Christ that went free. Verse 8, and he who is to be cleansed shall wash his clothes, shave off all his hair, and bathe himself in water, and he shall be clean. And after that he may come into the camp, but live outside his tent 7 days to protect his family. And on the 7th day he shall shave off all of his hair, his head, his beard, and his eyebrows. Wow, pretty intense. He shall shave off all his hair, then he shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and he shall be clean. So there was a long process. Now today we just call that personal hygiene. By the way, there's an ongoing debate with me and one of our pastors about what's better hygiene, showers or bathing. I believe bathing is bathing in your own juices. I believe only a shower truly makes you clean. But that's a side note. So there were rituals they had to follow. And we call it personal hygiene, right? We bathe, we shower, we use soap. I mean, we do things to keep ourselves healthy. If we're sick, we try to stay away from people. So we have personal hygienes today, but we don't believe personal hygiene makes you unholy or impure, and sickness does not keep you away from the presence of the Most High God. Bad personal hygiene may keep you away from the presence of people, but it doesn't prevent you from being in the presence of God. So today we're not afraid of sickness as it somehow makes us impure and not able to be re-engaged with a holy God, but to them, it was all about the outward appearance, all about what this vessel looked like, and all about following rituals to try to stay holy. So again, he does the same thing with the house. There's a sacrifice to get back in the house. And then bodily discharges. Again, any kind of bodily discharge from man or woman made you unclean. And for instance, verse 13 in the next chapter, it says, for the man. And when the one with a discharge is cleansed of his discharge, then he shall count for himself 7 days for his cleansing, and wash his clothes. And he shall bathe his body in fresh water, and shall be clean. And on the 8th day he shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, and come before the Lord to the entrance of the tent of the meeting, and give them to the priest. And the priest shall use them, one for a sin offering, and another for a burnt offering. Why a sin offering? I thought there was no sin involved. Anything that kept you away from the purity, any part of you that was impure or unholy, even because of something that happened to you, even a bodily discharge, they felt it was necessary to give an offering to make sure you were truly whole and holy before you became in contact with a sacred and holy God. So there were a sin offering, another burnt offering, and the priest shall make atonement for him before the Lord and for the discharge. And so the same thing goes for the woman. If she is cleansed of her discharge, she shall count for herself 7 days. After that she shall be clean. And on the 8th day she shall take 2 turtle doves, 2 pigeons, bring them to the priest, to the entrance of the tent meeting. And the priest shall use one for sin offering, another for burnt offering. So at the same time, every time they did this, the remedy included a washing, a moment of time, and a final offering to make sure they were again consecrated and made pure and holy, so they could again enter sacred spaces and be in the presence of a sacred and holy God. So this is and it says here at the last verse, to be holy in the presence of a pure, that's my writing, to be holy and in the presence of a pure, undefiled God one must practice both ritual cleansing or be prohibited from entering any sacred spaces. So again, these ritual cleansings, this ritual purity, was not the same as acts of immorality, of doing acts of sin like idolatry or bloodshed or sexual immorality. Those are things people did with actions. But this impurity happened to people. Sickness happens. Diseases happen. Mold happens. People die. Things happen. Bodily discharges happen. So this is different. One was a willful act of disobedience. That's immorality. The other one is just life in general, and the impurities must be taken away. The good thing is, when Jesus died for us, we received him because he became the final sacrifice. And this is what it says in Hebrews chapter 10, starting in verse 8. I want to read this to you. It's so beautiful. When he said above, you have neither desired nor taken pleasures in sacrifices and offerings and burnt offerings and sin offerings, these are offered according to the law. Then he added, behold, I have come to do your will. He does away with first in order to establish the second. And by that he will have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all. The difference between today and Old Testament times is that when Jesus gave himself as the one single sacrifice, it was for everyone at all times. So no longer does a disease or sickness or bodily discharge or mold in your house or being at a funeral where someone has died or being in the presence of someone who is sick, no longer do you need to do an additional ritual sacrifice so that you may again be in the presence of the Most High God. It is believing upon the sacrifice once and for all by Jesus that cleanses you and allows you to stay in the presence of God. Now, having said all of that, I'm going to finish with this. There is sanctification, and I want to remind us of this. Sanctification means you are sanctified by the blood of Jesus, but this vessel, because it lives in a sinful world, this vessel is impacted by a sinful world. And therefore, not only have you been sanctified to be in the presence of God and to receive eternal life, there is a constant sanctification of your vessel. You're constantly trying to maintain sanctification of this vessel. In other words, are you keeping your thoughts pure? What are you reading? What are you seeing? Is it pure? What you're speaking, is it pure? Do you come before God constantly and ask God to help you see ways where you are not following him as he delights? So keeping your vessel pure means to prohibit yourself from entering into immoral acts that are willfully against the purity of what God has called you to do. So we still can commit immoral acts. You still need to ask forgiveness for those immoral acts. But as a Christian, when you are tainted by the sin of the world, or you are tainted by your own lack of self-discipline, you do not lose your salvation. You are not cast into hell. You simply must continue the sanctification. Jesus, I made a mistake. Please forgive me of my sin. And go on with your day. That doesn't mean you're crucifying Christ again. It simply means you're trying to keep this vessel clean so you may be used without stumbling block for the glory of God. Well, hope that helped you today about ritual cleansing, ritual purity. It is not the same as sexual immorality. And we'll see you again tomorrow morning. At what time? That's right, 7:47. God bless you all. See you then.